Across bustling capitals and quiet academic enclaves, clusters of experts work tirelessly behind the scenes, shaping the policies that govern nations and influence lives. These groups, think tanks, and policy networks form an essential, if often invisible, part of the machinery of modern governance. Their members sift through data, debate ideas, and craft recommendations that filter into legislative halls, executive offices, and public discourse. Think tanks began as specialized research institutions, but over time, they have evolved alongside the shifting needs of societies, adapting their roles and strategies. Policy networks, meanwhile, connect actors across sectors, forging alliances that transcend single organizations. Understanding these entities is crucial for grasping how ideas become action, how evidence informs decision-making, and how power is quietly brokered in the corridors of influence. In this exploration, we trace their origins, examine their methods, and consider their growing importance in an interconnected world. Think tanks and policy networks may seem like recent innovations in public policy, but their origins reach surprisingly far back in history. While the term think tank is modern, the role these organizations play has a long and varied lineage. To understand their foundations, it helps to look not only at today's vibrant global landscape of policy analysis and advocacy, but also at the early gatherings of scholars and advisors who set the stage for our contemporary institutions. The roots of think tanks can be traced to Europe as early as the 800s, when monarchs hired independent advisors for counsel on governance. These advisors operated outside the royal bureaucracy, forming loose networks of expertise and offering insights from beyond the established hierarchy. This tradition continued and grew over the centuries, with notable examples in the humanist academies and scholarly circles of the 16th and 17th centuries. In Paris, the Académie des Frères Dupuy, established around 1620, brought together intellectuals to discuss pressing issues of the day. Later, the Club de l'Entresol, active from 1723 to 1731, served a similar purpose by creating a space for informed debate and the exchange of policy ideas. These gatherings were, in many respects, the forerunners of today's think tanks. Their influence stemmed not from official power, but from the generation and spread of ideas. As societies grew more complex and governance became more challenging, the need for specialized research and independent analysis became increasingly clear. The modern think tank began to take shape in the United Kingdom during the 19th and early 20th centuries. The Royal United Services Institute for Defense and Security Studies, founded in 1831, is often cited as the world's first think tank. Its creation marked a turning point, introducing a new kind of organization dedicated to rigorous research on defense and security issues, with the explicit goal of informing government policy. This model systematic study of public problems and actionable recommendations proved influential not only in Britain, but around the world. Another milestone came with the founding of the Fabian Society in late 19th century Britain. The Fabian Society is often considered the first true think tank in the sense that it sought to shape public policy through research and advocacy. Rather than studying policy for its own sake, the Fabians aimed to influence government decisions, highlighting a core purpose that still defines think tanks today, bridging the gap between knowledge and action. The rise of think tanks is closely linked to major historical shifts: the decline of the British Empire, the emergence of the United States as a global power, and notable failures in policymaking all contributed to their growth. As industrialization and urbanization transformed societies, new economic and social challenges demanded fresh thinking and impartial advice. Before 1945, most think tanks focused on economic issues, reflecting the urgent need to manage the sweeping changes brought by the Industrial Revolution. The Cold War era saw a dramatic expansion in the number and influence of think tanks, especially in the United States and other Western countries. Governments increasingly turned to these organizations for guidance on everything from military strategy to economic development, recognizing the value of independent, evidence-based analysis. Since the end of the Cold War in 1991, think tanks have proliferated worldwide, particularly in non-Western regions. This growth has been remarkable. Over half of all existing think tanks have been established since 1980, and by October 2025, there are about 6,500 think tanks globally. Despite their shared commitment to research and advocacy, think tanks are far from uniform. Most are non-governmental organizations, though some operate as semi-autonomous government agencies or have ties to political parties, businesses, or the military. Some focus on applied research, addressing specific problems with direct policy implications, while others engage in more basic research that lays the groundwork for future innovations. The diversity of organizational models and analytical styles is a hallmark of the sector. There is no single path or best practice for think tank development, and comparative studies show that local context plays a significant role in shaping each institution's evolution. What unites think tanks is their core function: developing solutions to social, economic, and political problems, informing and educating both decision-makers and the public, promoting new ideas, advocating for change, holding those in power accountable, and creating spaces for informed debate. They play especially important roles throughout the policymaking cycle, which typically involves setting the agenda, formulating responses, making decisions, implementing options, and evaluating results. By providing evidence-based research and actionable recommendations at each stage, think tanks help ensure the policy is grounded in the best available analysis rather than ideology or inertia. The influence of think tanks on public policy is significant, though not always easy to measure. Policies are broad guidelines designed to achieve specific outcomes, and attributing policy change to any one organization is often complex. Influence is usually shared among multiple actors, with think tanks serving as just one part of a larger ecosystem of policy development and debate. Nevertheless, their role in facilitating stakeholder interactions, fostering dialogue, and keeping important issues on the public agenda is widely recognized. As think tanks have multiplied and diversified, efforts to track their performance and impact have grown as well. The annual Global Go to Think Tank Index, for example, seeks to identify leading organizations worldwide, though the criteria and methodologies for such rankings remain debated among experts. While think tanks primarily produce research and recommendations, policy networks offer a different but complementary perspective on the policy process. Policy networks are sets of informal and formal interactions among public and private actors with interdependent interests. These networks are not organizations in the traditional sense, but rather structured relationships, connecting government agencies, non-governmental organizations, private sector entities, and other stakeholders involved in policymaking. The concept of policy networks emerged as governments recognized their limited capacity to act as sole authorities in an increasingly complex world. Instead of operating within rigid hierarchies, modern policy processes often involve a web of interdependent actors, each contributing different resources, perspectives, and interests. Policy networks reflect this reality, highlighting the decentralized and participatory nature of contemporary governance. Scholars have developed various typologies to describe the forms these networks can take. One influential framework, proposed by R.A.W. Rhodes in 1981, describes a continuum from policy communities characterized by stable membership and clear boundaries, often found in the United Kingdom, to issue networks, which are looser, more fluid groupings with changing participants, commonly seen in the United States. Other classifications consider factors such as the degree of integration among members, the size of the network, and how resources are distributed within it. Policy networks are typically analyzed in the context of collective decision-making, a field with a long history in political science. They are sometimes called collective decision-making networks, influence networks, or power networks, depending on the focus of study. The emphasis is usually on how the interests of various actors are reflected in policy decisions, and how the formal and informal linkages among these actors shape outcomes. A key contribution of policy network analysis is its integration of social network concepts with political science. This approach has been especially useful in understanding the dynamics of policy change, including how new ideas spread and how ideological convergence occurs across different actors and institutions. Policy networks serve as social maps of the policymaking process, offering an overview of who is involved, how they are connected, and what resources or influence they bring to the policy arena. Policy networks are not static. They evolve as new actors enter, as issues rise and fall in importance, and as relationships among stakeholders shift over time. Issue networks, in particular, play a crucial role in the early stages of policymaking, when the boundaries of a problem are still being defined and the diffusion of policy innovations is most rapid. The analytical perspective offered by policy network theory arose as scholars and practitioners recognized the limitations of viewing government as the sole or even dominant authority in policy development. Instead, the network approach emphasizes the importance of strategic and institutionalized contexts, where public, semi-public, and private actors interact, sometimes cooperatively, sometimes competitively, to shape the substance and direction of public policy. This shift in perspective has had important implications for how we understand both the challenges and opportunities of policymaking in a complex, interconnected world. It has also influenced the work of think tanks, which often serve as key nodes within policy networks, connecting diverse stakeholders and facilitating the flow of information and ideas. The interplay between think tanks and policy networks is especially evident in areas where rapid change or high uncertainty demands new approaches to problem solving. For example, megatrends analysis and future research, fields that examine long-term social, economic, and technological shifts, are closely linked to the work of think tanks, which strive to anticipate emerging issues and inform strategic decision-making. In this context, research, advocacy, and network building become mutually reinforcing, as think tanks help map out potential futures and policy networks provide channels through which innovative ideas are tested, refined, and ultimately adopted or set aside. Despite their growing prominence, there is no universal model for the development of think tanks or policy networks. Diversity is the norm, and comparative analyses suggest that what works in one context may not translate directly to another. This diversity reflects differences in political systems and cultures, as well as the unique challenges faced by each society at a given time. In summary, the foundations of think tanks and policy networks are both deep and dynamic. Think tanks, rooted in centuries-old traditions of independent advice and scholarly exchange, have evolved into dynamic research organizations aiming to influence policymaking at every level, from local to global. Policy networks, meanwhile, provide a framework for understanding the complex, interconnected nature of modern governance, highlighting the importance of relationships, resources, and shared interests in shaping public decisions. Together, these institutions and concepts illuminate the broader landscape of policy development. They remind us that policymaking is rarely the product of a single mind or institution, but rather emerges from a tapestry of interactions, negotiations, and shared efforts. By studying their origins, definitions, and core purposes, we gain a richer appreciation for how ideas, actors, and institutions come together to address the most pressing challenges of our time. Think tanks, at their core, are engines of ideas, institutions that mobilize expertise to shape policy and, in doing so, help determine the direction of societies. Yet behind the scenes, the ways these organizations are structured and the strategies they employ are as varied and dynamic as the policies they seek to influence. As the number of think tanks has grown, especially in recent decades, so too has the complexity of their organizational models and the sophistication of their influence tactics. Political activists, particularly among conservatives, have played a key role in driving this proliferation, establishing organizations whose blueprints have been widely emulated. The result is a vibrant and competitive landscape, where think tanks must continually adapt their structures, funding models, and outreach efforts not only to survive, but to remain relevant and credible in an ever-shifting policy environment. The foundation of a think tank's operations lies in its business model, a concept that encompasses far more than just sources of funding. It is, in essence, the blueprint for how the organization creates, delivers, and sustains value for its various stakeholders. Funding is a critical piece of this puzzle. In the United States, for example, top think tanks draw support from a diverse mix of sources, private foundations, corporations, foreign governments, and even the United States government itself. Yet only a minority, approximately 18%, are fully transparent about where their money comes from. This lack of transparency can raise legitimate questions about intellectual independence and the potential for conflicts of interest. Foreign governments and defense contractors, in particular, have come under scrutiny for their roles as major donors, prompting calls for greater transparency and more robust governance structures. Governance itself can take many forms, shaped by national laws, business models, and organizational affiliations. Some think tanks are steered by traditional boards of directors, others by assemblies, and still others by executive directors with significant authority. The choice of governance model has far-reaching implications. Good governance is not just about compliance or internal decision-making, it underpins effective management and, crucially, the trust of funders and the wider policy community. For think tanks affiliated with universities, political parties, or broader networks, the governance arrangement may be dictated by that relationship, resulting in a spectrum of models from highly autonomous to closely integrated. If funding and governance are the bones of a think tank, its research process is the beating heart. The main output of these organizations is policy expertise, which can take the form of concrete proposals grounded in evidence, or, at the other end of the spectrum, ambitious, blue skies thinking that challenges conventional wisdom. Think tanks are distinguished by their interdisciplinary approach, drawing on insights from economics, political science, law, technology, and many other fields to tackle issues ranging from domestic budgets to global security. Their research serves multiple functions, informing policymakers, sparking public debate, and, at its best, bringing new ideas into the policy arena. A defining feature of think tanks is their role as brokers of policy knowledge. They occupy a unique position between the scholarly world and the corridors of power, translating complex theories into actionable recommendations that are accessible to decision-makers and the public alike. In many emerging markets, think tanks go further, acting as reform leaders and reliable sources of data in environments where governments often dominate policymaking and independent information is scarce. By channeling knowledge between scholars, policymakers, and civil society, think tanks help ensure that policy is grounded in rigorous analysis rather than ideology or expediency. Yet the influence of a think tank rarely unfolds in a straight line. Their impact is often indirect, difficult to quantify, and deeply context-dependent. The stories of the Brookings Institution's contributions to the Marshall Plan or the Carnegie Endowment's efforts behind the United Nations Anti-Genocide Convention illustrate this subtlety. While think tanks may play pivotal roles in shaping major policy initiatives, the credit is seldom theirs alone. According to a recent survey, over three-quarters of think tanks claim to have directly influenced specific policy outcomes in the past 5 years, regardless of their size. However, even the most influential organizations acknowledge the challenge of measuring direct impact. Success may depend as much on timing, political alignment, and the receptiveness of policymakers as on the substance of their research. This is where strategy comes into play. Think tanks must be clear about what they seek to influence, whom they need to reach, and when the opportunity for impact is greatest. Building relationships is as important as building arguments. Effective policy influence is rarely achieved through a single report or recommendation. It is the result of sustained engagement, tailored communications, and a willingness to adapt to changing circumstances. For many think tanks, advocacy is now as integral to their mission as research itself. They combine traditional outputs, policy briefs, reports, and expert testimony with targeted advocacy campaigns, often using new media tools to reach wider and more diverse audiences. The rise of digital platforms has transformed the way think tanks communicate and advocate. Today, their expertise and opinions are disseminated across social media, amplifying their visibility and, potentially, their influence. The rapid spread of ideas in this digital environment enables think tanks to engage in real-time debates, respond quickly to emerging issues, and build communities of interest around their research. Communication strategies have become more sophisticated, involving detailed stakeholder mapping, the use of new media, and the careful calibration of messages to different audiences. A well-crafted advocacy and communications plan sets measurable objectives, analyzes stakeholders, and deploys tactics tailored to each group's interests and needs. Branding has emerged as another crucial component in building credibility and attracting support. In a crowded marketplace of ideas, a strong brand signals expertise, reliability, and trustworthiness. It not only helps a think tank stand out, but also reassures funders and stakeholders that the organization is a legitimate and effective actor in the policy space. The process of branding is ongoing and relational, built over time through the quality of research, the transparency of operations, and the consistency of values. Without a strong brand, even the most insightful research can struggle to gain traction. Credibility is, in many respects, the currency of the think tank world. It qualifies these organizations to participate in the policy process, secure funding, and maintain a seat at the table when important decisions are made. Credibility is not a static attribute. It is relational, continually negotiated through trust, expertise, independence, and transparency. In an era sometimes described as post-truth, where information is abundant but often contested, the challenge of maintaining credibility is more acute than ever. Think tanks distinguish themselves from lobbying fronts or advocacy groups by upholding rigorous quality assurance processes, such as internal review and peer review, and by being transparent about their funding and research methods. For student-led or emerging think tanks, these mechanisms are especially important in building a reputation for quality and relevance. Bias, however, remains an ever-present risk. The backgrounds of staff and the interests of funders can shape the perspectives and priorities of think tanks, sometimes subtly, sometimes overtly. Resources like SourceWatch and Think Tank Search have emerged to help the public and policymakers assess the potential biases of different organizations. The existence of evaluative tools speaks to the ongoing need for vigilance and critical engagement with the outputs of even the most respected think tanks. Among the most influential in the United States are the Economic Policy Institute, the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities, the Brookings Institution, the American Enterprise Institute, and the Cato Institute, each representing different ideological and methodological traditions. The challenge of funding and sustainability looms particularly large for think tanks in developing countries. Many of these organizations rely heavily on international funding, which can introduce its own set of pressures and expectations. As the sector evolves, think tanks are experimenting with new business models, seeking ways to deliver value to stakeholders and to convince funders to invest in that value. This innovation is not just about financial survival, it is about ensuring that think tanks remain relevant and effective in a rapidly changing policy landscape. Adjacent to and often overlapping with think tanks are policy networks, webs of relationships that bring together a diverse array of actors to shape policy outcomes. These networks are not just vehicles for consensus building. They also play a critical role in making policy more legitimate and informed by involving stakeholders from across society. Policy networks can take many forms, from tightly organized policy communities to looser epistemic communities centered on shared expertise or values. They are often instrumental in proposing solutions to policy challenges and in defending specific instruments or approaches. The dynamism of policy networks lies in their ability to adapt and evolve as new actors and ideas enter the field. In contexts where donor dependence is high or where political institutions are in flux, changes in the composition or structure of a network can open the door to new perspectives and innovative solutions. This openness can be a powerful force for policy change, especially when established institutions are resistant to new ideas. For both think tanks and policy networks, the art of influence is as much about timing and relationship management as it is about the substance of their recommendations. Policy influence requires an acute awareness of windows of opportunity, a deep understanding of the institutional landscape, and the flexibility to adjust strategies as circumstances evolve. Regular meetings, tailored information sharing, and the cultivation of trust are all essential elements of effective stakeholder communication. The most successful organizations are those that combine analytical rigor with real-world savvy, able to navigate the complex interplay of interests, ideas, and institutions that define the policy process. As the world confronts a host of emerging challenges, from technological disruption to global health threats, think tanks are increasingly turning their attention to megatrends analysis and future research. Their role as anticipators and interpreters of global shifts is becoming more important, helping policymakers and business leaders alike prepare for the uncertainties ahead. New technologies, such as artificial intelligence and blockchain, are already reshaping international relations and the broader policy environment. Think tanks are adapting not only by researching these trends, but by incorporating them into their own operations and advocacy strategies. In this ever-changing landscape, the enduring relevance of think tanks and policy networks depends on their ability to remain credible, innovative, and connected. Their structures and strategies may evolve, but their core mission endures: to mobilize expertise and ideas in the service of better policy. As catalysts for informed debate and brokers of knowledge, they continue to play a vital, if often understated, role in shaping the choices that define our collective future. Across continents and cultures, the landscape of think tanks and policy networks is as diverse as the societies they serve. In the complex policy ecosystems of the 21st century, the ways these organizations operate, influence, and adapt are deeply shaped by their local political and cultural contexts. Consider, for example, the contrasting approaches found in Belgium and China. Comparative studies show that Belgian think tanks, working within a pluralistic democracy, prioritize consensus building and seek long-term solutions to policy challenges. Their work is often collaborative, reflecting the country's tradition of negotiation and coalition. In China, by contrast, think tanks have carved out a role in foreign policy, exerting influence despite the constraints of an authoritarian system. Their expertise is valued, but the boundaries of permissible debate are tightly controlled, and think tanks must navigate a landscape where autonomy is limited. These differences underscore a central truth: there is no universal model for how think tanks operate or succeed. Each is shaped by its own ecosystem of institutions, values, and power structures. As governance grows more complex, policy networks have become increasingly prominent. Governance network theory now serves as a key lens in public administration, reflecting the intricate webs of relationships that define policymaking worldwide. Policies are no longer crafted solely within government walls. Instead, they emerge from negotiations among a broad array of actors: public agencies, private firms, advocacy groups, and, of course, think tanks. These networks are fluid, sometimes formal, often informal, and always dynamic. They capture the messiness of real-world policymaking, where influence is shared, contested, and constantly renegotiated. Yet, even as think tanks and policy networks adapt to these new realities, they face a profound crisis of trust. Across the globe, social and political trust is eroding, and with it, confidence and expertise of all kinds. The 2024 Edelman Trust Barometer offers a sobering snapshot. 61% of people worldwide believe that governments and businesses now serve only narrow interests. This climate of skepticism extends to think tanks, challenging their legitimacy and their ability to fulfill their mission. Once regarded as impartial sources of insight, many are now viewed with suspicion, their funding sources and affiliations scrutinized for hidden agendas. The challenge is especially acute in regions marked by deep political polarization, where think tanks may struggle to be heard above the din of partisan conflict. This polarization is not limited to any one region. The 2024 State of the Sector report highlights its growing impact in Latin America, the Caribbean, and non-European Union Europe. Here, polarization is not just an abstract concern, it is a tangible barrier to engagement, dialogue, and even funding. In highly charged environments, think tanks may see their work dismissed as partisan, or their efforts to foster debate undermined by entrenched mistrust. These difficulties are compounded by persistent funding disparities. Think tanks in wealthier countries continue to enjoy greater resources, while those in lower-income regions must do more with less, often amid shrinking democratic space and growing social volatility. Amid these challenges, technology has emerged as both a force for renewal and a source of new obstacles. The digital transformation sweeping the world has disrupted traditional patterns of information flow, eroding the gatekeeping roles that once structured public debate. Today, anyone with an internet connection can publish analysis, commentary, or misinformation on a global scale. This democratization of knowledge brings clear benefits, opening new avenues for civic engagement and amplifying voices that might once have gone unheard. But it also carries risks: the spread of misinformation, manipulation of narratives, and the blurring of boundaries between fact and opinion. For think tanks, these dynamics complicate efforts to inform, persuade, and build consensus. The very tools that can help them reach wider audiences also expose them to new forms of competition, scrutiny, and disruption. The rise of technology platforms is a double-edged sword. On one hand, they provide think tanks with unprecedented opportunities for outreach, collaboration, and research. On the other, they contribute to the very polarization that undermines trust and expertise. Algorithms designed to maximize engagement often amplify voices at the extremes, making it harder for organizations focused on nuanced, evidence-based analysis to be heard. Regulatory challenges abound, as governments and civil society struggle to keep pace with the rapid evolution of technology and its impact on the policy environment. The transformative potential of digital technologies cannot be overstated. Artificial intelligence, in particular, is rapidly reshaping the way knowledge is produced and consumed. For think tanks, artificial intelligence tools promise more efficient research, faster analysis, and new ways to visualize and communicate complex ideas. Yet these same tools also present hazards. As artificial intelligence-generated content proliferates, there is a risk that the volume of information will outpace our collective capacity for understanding. The danger is not just more data, but more noise analysis, without insight, quantity without quality. In this context, think tanks must reconsider their role, focusing not just on generating research, but on helping policymakers and the public make sense of it. The digital age also brings questions of privacy, security, and equality to the forefront. The digital divide persists, with some regions and populations better positioned to benefit from technological advances than others. Algorithmic bias threatens to reinforce existing inequalities, making it harder for marginalized voices to be heard in policy debates. For think tanks committed to inclusive research and advocacy, these are not abstract concerns but immediate, practical challenges. Navigating this new terrain requires vigilance, adaptability, and a willingness to question established ways of working. In many parts of the Global South, these challenges are intensified by shrinking democratic spaces and the disruptive impact of disinformation. Here, think tanks operate in environments where trust is already fragile and where the risks associated with independent analysis are often acute. At the same time, youth activism and digital platforms are reshaping public agendas, bringing new energy and urgency to debates about governance, justice, and the future. This dynamism is a source of hope, but also of volatility. The same forces that empower new voices can also destabilize established institutions, making the work of think tanks more unpredictable and, at times, more perilous. Despite these obstacles, there are signs of resilience and optimism, especially in lower-income regions. The 2025 On Think Tank State of the Sector report notes that while funding cuts are a reality for many, optimism for future growth remains highest where the challenges are greatest. Collaboration, both within and across borders, is increasingly seen as essential to navigating the political, financial, and technological headwinds facing the sector. Think tanks are partnering with universities, civil society organizations, and even other think tanks to pool resources, share knowledge, and amplify their impact. Still, the fundamental questions of transparency and accountability remain unresolved. As funding pressures and competition intensify, the risk that think tanks may compromise on independence or rigor grows. Calls for greater openness about funding sources, research methodologies, and decision-making processes are becoming louder and more insistent. In an era of declining trust, the willingness to be transparent is itself a marker of credibility. Yet transparency is not always easy. In some contexts, revealing sources of support can expose think tanks to political retaliation or jeopardize their survival. Balancing these competing imperatives is an ongoing struggle, requiring constant attention and ethical discernment. The importance of think tanks and policy networks in shaping public policy and opinion has only grown amid global uncertainty. Their ability to bridge the gap between research and practice, to translate complex evidence into actionable recommendations, is more vital than ever. They are also playing a growing role in promoting international cooperation and governance, bringing together stakeholders from different sectors and countries to address shared challenges. In a world marked by fragmentation and mistrust, these bridging functions are both urgently needed and increasingly difficult to perform. Looking ahead, the future of think tanks and policy networks will depend on their capacity to adapt, collaborate, and innovate. The pressures they face are real: shrinking resources, rising polarization, and the relentless pace of technological change. But so too are the opportunities. The rapid evolution of digital tools offers new ways to reach audiences, mobilize support, and influence policy. The growing recognition of the importance of network governance creates space for new partnerships and modes of influence. Perhaps most importantly, the legitimacy of think tanks will rest on their ability to demonstrate value in an era of skepticism. This will require not only producing high-quality research, but engaging honestly with the public, acknowledging uncertainty, and being transparent about limitations and biases. It will mean building trust not through claims of neutrality, but through openness, rigor, and a commitment to serving the public good. The journey ahead is uncertain, and the challenges are formidable. Yet the diversity and adaptability of think tanks and policy networks, honed over decades and across continents, suggests they are well equipped to meet the moment. By embracing change, fostering collaboration, and renewing their commitment to transparency and accountability, these institutions can continue to play a critical role in shaping the policies and debates that will define the future. In a world where the only constant is change, their ability to inform, convene, and inspire remains as important as ever.